Mine probably has to be maces or halberds. Story 1, Bow and Arrow. The Mongols killed between 40 and 75 million people with it. The bow and arrow crushed empires with more weapons, troops, and armor simply by hitting and running away when the enemy got too close. Story 2, my username finally checking in. Spears are greater than swords. Story 3, ever heard of a flamberge sword? It's literally a sword with a flame wave pattern. It's not unlike a medieval fantasy sword you'd find in The Witcher that turned out to actually be real. I guess technically it'd be impractical for duels and actual sword fighting, but one good cut from that flame wave blade pattern or one good stab and you're done. There's a reason why twists and waveform blades are banned. Typically, it's because wave-like cuts are difficult to suture and stitch back together on wounds. So your chances of mortal death go from 90% to 200% instantly with a blade like that when penetrated, cut, or stabbed. Story 4, polearms in general. War, for the majority of human history, was basically a game of who could fix the longest, pointiest sticks together in the closest formations and avoid getting skewered themselves. Story 5, halberd. It has a longer range than most handheld weapons. It's useful for fighting horsemen from the ground and, above all, looks cool. Edit. I forgot to say that I appreciate the freshness of this post. It's nice to forget about all that depressing dating stuff and think about my life in medieval times. At my age, I would probably already be dead from dysentery. Story 6, sidesword. It was a transitional weapon between the early medieval broadsword and the rapier. So light and nimble for thrusting, but still wide and weighty enough to cut with. Plus, some complex hand protection compared to the earlier crossguard. Story 7, a morning star. It requires no skill to use like a sword. It's just a big spiky bonk stick. Heavy as hell, but a fair price to pay for the annihilation of an individual. Hit a guy on the head, he probably won't die from the impact because of a helmet, but it very well could disorient him long enough to do real damage. Story 8, halberd. Versatile as can be used as a slashing, bludgeoning, or piercing weapon, and can let even a peasant stand a chance against a mounted opponent. Story 9, I'm a pretty big fan of the Lucerne hammer. You have slashing, smashing, stabbing, reach, and that long handle gives you some decent blocking potential. It's like a Swiss Army knife, which, if you know why it has that name, then that's a pun for you too. Story 10. People forget that gunpowder weapons were, in fact, present during the medieval age. By the year 1500, the end of the medieval age, cast bronze cannons on wheeled platforms were already in common use, and they were roughly as effective as cannons from 3 centuries later, although the later cannons were much lighter and used smaller powder charges as designers learned how to make more efficient weapons with better metal. Story 11. Aztec sword. Obsidian glass is insanely sharp, and when parts of it break off, the blade stays sharp rather than going dull over time. Also, the use of a thick wooden bat to hold the glass means the weapon is very sturdy. Not sure how much they typically weighed, but I can imagine it was a good balance between lightness and weight to drive through objects or people. Story 12. Not quite medieval, but I love that ships had short cannons that were very mobile and much easier to load, with a shot that was about the size of a bowling ball, if not a bit smaller. Just a quick personal cannon that could be wheeled on the deck from side to side, taking potshots here and there. Story 13. I completely agree on the halberd. You have a spear, an axe, and a grabbing bit. It's menacing looking. It's functional. It's basically the Swiss Army knife of things that can harm you in the 1300s. Story 14. The spear. There are some fancy nobles charging us on horses. My friends and I just get information, hold the line, and let them impale themselves on our spears. Some fools charging us on foot. Stay in formation, let them impale themselves. We don't have to learn how to do anything fancy. Just stand shoulder to shoulder with the allies and stay in formation. Story 15. A warhammer with a 2 to 3 inch hammerhead and a 4 to 6 inch pike. The weight is negligible, and the warhammer is guaranteed to break bones and rip skin. The pike provides armor penetration power. Typically, it comes with a 36-inch handle, but I like to cut it down to tomahawk handle length. I've used swords, hatchets, tomahawks, spears, gladius, long swords, hand-and-a-half swords, mace, etc. I was once a military weapons expert, boots and saddles and all that jazz. Story 16. Have you got an appointment? He said. I don't know, said Carrot. Have we got an appointment? I've got an iron ball with spikes on, Nobby volunteered. That's a morning star, Nobby. Is it? Yes, said Carrot. An appointment is an engagement to see someone, while a morning star is a large lump of metal used for viciously crushing skulls. It is important not to confuse the two, isn't it, mister? He raised his eyebrows. Boffo, sir. But, so, if you could perhaps run along and tell Dr. Whiteface we're here with an iron ball with SPI, what am I saying? I mean, without an appointment to see him, please? Thank you. Story 17. Halberds have reach and flexibility against infantry, cavalry, peasants, and knights. They helped give the everyday man a chance against the wealthy elites and disrupt the social order that concentrated power in the hands of warriors. Story 18. The handheld weapon has to be the longbow. It was an incredible invention for the English during Edward III's reign. Long range, very powerful, and undeniably cool. But for the ultimate weapon, loup de guerre. This trebuchet was colossal for its time, essentially the 12th century version of the Manhattan Project, capable of flinging projectiles up to 140 kilograms around 200 meters. Considering it was essentially a trebuchet on steroids, it must have been incredible to have seen or terrifying, depending on which side you were on. Story 19. Long sabers such as the Swiss saber from the Wallace collection were not common at all, but they were most commonly found in 15th to 16th century northeastern Italy. I believe Matt Easton made a video on a historical piece a few months ago. Story 20. There's a purity of purpose to a sword that's hard to ignore. It's not a tool that's been adapted into a weapon like an axe or hammer, and it's not a hunting weapon that can be used for warfare like a bow or a spear. Its only purpose is to kill. Story 21. I would have to say a Danish axe. Good reach, effective against most types of armor, ability to stab or chop, parries between the hands well, and absolutely horrifying when used correctly, especially in the hands of well-armored shock troops. Story 22. Slim hateful attempt Middle Desert plow license safe poor encouraging. This post was mass deleted and anonymized with redact. Story 23. Mace because it's simple. Spear for flexibility and reach. Dagger for close work and last resort. Longbow for range and because I am British. Story 24. Always the flail or mace. Have fun blocking this 10-pound steel ball, motherfucker. I'm crushing your skull through your shiny helmet, and you better not let me get on a horse and get my speed up. Story 25. That one ball full of spikes on a chain with a handle. I probably kill myself trying to use it. But that one. Edit. Apparently, it's called Morningstar according to my Google search. Story 26. There's only one possible answer to this. The rapier. Although a Renaissance weapon, it's just so incredibly cool. My greatest fantasy as a child was imagining myself as a Spanish 16th century fencing master with a stylish hat featuring a long feather on top. Story 27. English longbow. Powerful, lethal, high skill ceiling. Opened up entirely new tactical doctrines involving fire support and massed archers, allowing vast numbers of soldiers to mutually support each other. Area denial. Outright ruined France's king and armies at the Battle of Crécy. Story 28. Yes, a mace. Although we were at the fortress in Salzburg the other day and saw this, kinda amazing, right? Whoops, just saw medieval on the title, so maybe wrong time period. Story 29. Axe, please. Unarmored? Broken bones and deep cuts. Armored? Flip it around and crack your skull beneath your helmet. Hook the arms, wrench open the shields, and even throw it with good force and accuracy. Maybe even break an arm beneath the shield if I hit hard enough. And cut firewood. Slides a Norwegian-shaped heritage behind back. I only did a little medieval swordsmanship in college, I swear. Story 30. The lucerne has most of the advantages of a spear, but with added utility against armor like a coat of plates or lamellar. It is relatively cheaper and faster to produce than a halberd, and not quite as unwieldy. Runner-up is the war dart. The broad head, somewhat lightweight, and fletching make it particularly effective against lightly armored opponents. They are so cheap and easy to use that a group of minimally trained peasants could throw these into advancing opponents quite liberally in higher numbers than you could with skilled archers. I add these things to my Dungeons and Dragons games because they're not common in popular media, but they are really neat. Story 31. Good old spear. Relatively cheap, long reach, can cut and stab. Edit. It is my mistake. Spears are very ancient, not medieval if I am correct. I still pick spears as they were used in the medieval era. Story 32. I used to be a huge battle axe or warhammer guy. Now I really like the misericord or stiletto. It's a very long and thin dagger, usually used for mercy kills on a badly wounded soldier. It's designed to slip through the rib cages and puncture the heart for a quick death. Story 33. Simple, the war pick. Nothing like a little bit of blunt force trauma to ruin a knight's day or a precise strike to the gaps in his armor with the literal pick once you and your mates dragged the poor guy off his horse. Like damn, war was brutal back then. Story 34. Swords, specifically the bastard sword and the knightly sword, are essential. Sure, spears are good, but what self-respecting knight doesn't have a sword? My second choice would be a good old axe. Want the cutting power of a sword and the weight of a mace? A good old axe will never let you down. Story 35. The Morning Star is a powerful weapon. I saw someone on television try it on a human-like gel mannequin that mimics human flesh. With one strike, it tore the entire top half of the guy's head off. Story 36. The crossbow. You could practically make that thing into a launcher by modifying the bolts with hazardous arrowheads. Lace it with poison, set it on fire, make it serrated, strap a combustible to it, tie some toxic powder or liquid vials to it. There's no limit to the creativity of deadly crossbow bolts you can make as long as you disregard morals and ethics or the Geneva Convention. Story 37. I would say the halberd is a really good option if you are willing to carry it around. It has enough weight and spikes to threaten armor with swings and not just thrusts. You can easily use it in a spear line, and it gives you some reach without being so long that you cannot recover from someone closing the distance on you like some spears. Not to mention they are usually counterweight with a spike on the opposite end, making them surprisingly nimble. Story 38. Have you seen a flail? Who doesn't want to spin a spiked ball around on a chain attached to a stick? The most fun one can have smashing people's faces in. Story 39. There is a reason spears, or any violent instrument attached to a pole, are basically as old as humanity. They are also one of the longest-lasting melee weapons in human history, even retaining some form of prevalence well past the widespread implementations of firearms. But my actual answer is a hand and a half sword because I like swords and love to swing around sticks as a kid. Story 40. Close quarter combat would have to be swords, but at range, a bow and arrows. Now, trebuchets are certainly awesome, but they couldn't efficiently be operated alone, as far as I know, and that's why they're not my choice. Story 41. I don't know if anyone has read the Aragon series, and I don't know if this counts as medieval, but his cousin Roran fights with a hammer, and it's pretty badass. Story 42. They are absolutely terrible weapons and were only ever used by farmers as weapons of last resort, but I adore the idea of going at somebody with a big scythe. Story 43. Longbow. It changed the face of warfare at the time. Before the longbow, knights were the deciding factor. But knights were expensive to equip and feed. A group of average guys trained as archers could rain down arrows on the knights and at least hinder them, and there wasn't very much that special about them. They were trained to use a bow, but that's about it. They weren't elite fighting machines. They were lay people who had a job and were paid a wage. Story 44. Others have said it, but crossbow. Wah, cheaters. Used to complain about them. Don't care. Give me 3 loaded ones. Burly and strong at the arm knew what they were doing. Story 45. I realize swords are thought of as overrated, and they are cooler than they are truly practical, but damn, I love a good long sword or great sword or short swords. After that, I would say a warhammer is my second favorite. I just like the versatility and yet simplicity of it. Story 46. Depends, are katanas medieval? I don't know in all honesty. If not, then swords in general. I just really like swords. To be honest, I should say crossbow. If you know, if not, find the X-ray on my profile. Story 47. Any kind of two-handed sword. I don't care if they usually weren't practical. They are awesome. Pretty much any fantasy role-playing game I play, my character is using a two-handed sword. Story 48. Ballista. I once watched a low-budget film about a Dungeons and Dragons game. The thief looted a man's pants, then critically rolled a point-blank attack from behind using a ballista. The group was splattered in entrails and sloshing around in guts. It was quite amusing. Story 49. Composite bows are amazing and I'm good with a bow. I also like the Scandinavian Ulfbert swords and bearded axes because of their practicality. Story 50. A petard, which translates to loud fart, was basically a cast iron container filled with gunpowder and propped up against a gate. Better move it or you might get hoisted by your own massive fart. Story 51. I'd have to go with an X. Something practical around the home when you need to chop wood. Something practical around the battlefield when you need to chop enemies.